The Fall 2020 Hinkle, Pryor, and Fisher Parent Empowerment Conference. Realities for a New Reality. 2 days, 25 workshops, renowned speakers and presenters, by families, for families, nearly 40 hours of unfiltered and straightforward information, made possible by the leaders in disability rights advocacy for over 45 years, Hinkle, Pryor, and Fisher, attorneys at law. So welcome to this session of our ongoing encore presentation series of the Fall 2020 Hinkle, Pryor, and Fisher Parent Empowerment Conference.
Welcome, and thank you for attending the Hinkle, Pryor, and Fisher Virtual Parent Empowerment Conference. My name is Maria Fisher, and I will be moderating this workshop entitled SSI and Medicaid for Individuals with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. Our presenter today for this session is none other than Beverly Roberts of the State Arc of New Jersey. Welcome, Bev. We are so excited to have you here. Before we begin, a few housekeeping things. We're just going to ask all the participants to mute yourself and remain muted during the presentation. We will be taking questions through the chat box, so if everybody can locate the chat box, I know everybody's device is a little different, but if you can find your chat box, if you can just put your question in the chat box. We're going to hold questions till the very end of the presentation, and then we will run through as many of the questions as we possibly can, time permitting. Bev has very, very generously said that she can take separate questions. We are asking that all the questions that are in the chat box would be of a general nature, sort of like an understanding of something that was said or a clarification. If your question is more personal and pointed to a specific situation, Ms. Roberts' email address is at the bottom of the slide that's up right now. She's generously offered to have people email those types of specific questions to her. She will respond to every email. You may want to just know that it might take a week or so. So just be prepared, but she will definitely get back to you to answer your questions. So if everybody can make a note of her email address at this point, that would be great. So it is now my pleasure to introduce Bev Roberts. For more than 30 years, Bev Roberts has been the director of the Arc of New Jersey's mainstreaming medical care program. She provides advocacy and training on a wide range of healthcare issues that are important to individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families, including SSI, SSDI, Medicare, Medicaid, including Medicaid HMOs, and being duly eligible for both Medicare and Medicaid. She also explains to families the importance of their son or daughter with an intellectual or developmental disability having Medicaid and keeping Medicaid as a requirement of receiving services from New Jersey's Division of Developmental Disabilities. Bev serves on a number of work groups and committees, including the statewide Medical Assistance Advisory Council. She has a healthcare conference each year and distributes health-related emails and e-newsletters to a large and growing group list. Bev, thank you for all that you do, and thank you for taking time out of your Saturday to be here with us. Please begin your presentation. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Maria. Thank you for that lovely introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. Hi, everyone. So I have a lot of slides, and I think, Maria, these will be made available, perhaps if people want to have the slides afterward, that they would be able to get the slides.
Absolutely. With your permission, we will send an email to everybody who had registered for the particular workshop and share your slide deck with them.
Great. Thanks so much. Okay, here we go. Wait a second. I hope I should be. Here we go. Okay, the technology part is the most frustrating part of the entire presentation from my perspective. Okay, so a few words about the Arc of New Jersey. I have worked at the Arc of New Jersey for more than 30 years. It is a wonderful, wonderful place to work, as well as wonderful services that are provided by all of the staff who work for the Arc of New Jersey. We are the largest advocacy and service organization for children and adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families. founded back in 1949 by families of individuals with IDD, and remains today a consumer and family-driven organization. We serve the entire state of New Jersey through local and local county chapters and our state office programs. In addition to our programs, the ARC of New Jersey is highly involved in public policy, advocacy, and governmental affairs. Okay, that's the background information. Now we get into the meat of the presentation. Some of you may know some of this information, but for some folks it might be new. To receive DDD services at age 21, there are two criteria. You must be determined functionally eligible for DDD services. Somebody just, for whatever reason, I'm being notified of people that are in the waiting room that need to be admitted. This, I'm not sure why, but if I pause for a minute, it's because a bar comes up on my screen that says admit, and it covers a large part of my screen. So if I click admit, the bar goes away. If I don't, then it's going to block my screen.
So Bev, I'm also getting that bar. So I know it's hard, try to ignore it because I'm going to hit the admit button on my side. So you don't have to worry about it. I'm going to go back.
Okay, I'll try. Okay, so again, to be functionally eligible for DDD services, you must be determined eligible, functionally eligible by DDD, and you must have Medicaid. Now, there is an asterisk after the words must have Medicaid, and at the bottom it says in the asterisk, there is an exception to this DDD regulation on having Medicaid, which is known as Non-DAC. I will talk about that a little bit later in my presentation. Functional eligibility is determined from a questionnaire called the New Jersey Comprehensive Assessment Tool, or NJ CAT. The best way to have Medicaid, it's not the only way, but it is the best way if possible, is to apply for Supplemental Security Income, or SSI, at age 18. And if you get SSI, you will also get Medicaid automatically. Now, if there's a low-income family, they can apply for SSI when the person is considered a child. But some children already have income at age 18 and are not eligible for SSI. So there are other ways for them to become Medicaid eligible. I also want to emphasize, because we get asked this question from time to time, the parent is not required to have legal guardianship to apply for DDD services. There are other reasons why they might want to have legal guardianship, but it is not something that they have to have in order to apply for DDD services. Okay, now in planning for the SSI application, before starting, for any families that are in that position of thinking about, is it going to be the thing they need to do to plan at age 18 to be applying for their son or daughter to have SSI, it's helpful to set up a folder with some important information that will be helpful for you in doing the application. For sure, the IEPs for your son or daughter, progress reports and assessments, information from the child's doctors, including medications and doses, part-time jobs if applicable. If you need to have copies of reports that were done before, the child study team should be able to provide those. Also, keep in mind, one of the big things that the Social Security Administration is assessing when they review an SSI application is whether the person's disability will affect their ability to be self-supporting. So this is really not an issue of does the person have a disability or not. The issue is that disability going to impact their ability to be self-supporting? And again, that doesn't mean about not having a job at all, but having the kind of job that would be self-supporting for that individual. Okay, so when doing an application for SSI, resources of that 18-year-old are important. When a student is younger than age 18, Social Security is going to look at the family income. As soon as your son or daughter has their 18th birthday, the family's income is disregarded and only the consumer's income is considered, which is why we encourage applying for SSI as soon as possible after that 18th birthday. So even though the parent's income at age 18 for the son or daughter will not be considered, the person with the disability cannot have more than $2,000 in their name with their Social Security number. So please inform relatives not to leave money in their will to the person with IDD. They can certainly leave their assets to a special needs trust, and I'll talk a little bit more very briefly about special needs trusts in a little bit. But if money is left in the will of parents or grandparents or whomever for the individual with a developmental disability, and there is no special needs trust to which that money is being left, that money, if they've already got services, can throw them off the services because they won't have Medicaid. They'll have to spend out the money that was left in the will. And then when that money is spent, then they'd be able to apply for Medicaid and then have DDD services. So we certainly do not want that to happen. It's certainly something that's very avoidable, but it requires planning ahead. Every once in a while, I hear a sad story about, let's say, a grandparent who had 6 grandchildren and thought the right thing to do is leave assets equally to each of the 6 grandchildren. Nobody realized it. And then at some point when grandmom died and the son or daughter, the grandson or granddaughter who had IDD was thrown off of their services, they were like, oh my goodness, we should have made sure that that didn't happen. Okay, more on resources. If somebody with IDD has more than $2,000, but not a whole lot more than $2,000 in their resources, parents can do a documentation for spend down on money that the parents have probably already paid. Summer camp, class trip, therapies not covered by insurance. That certainly is legitimate. The parents for an 18-year-old, they cannot do a spend down on food, clothing, or shelter because that's a parent's responsibility for a child. And again, childhood in the eyes of Social Security, childhood ends on the 18th birthday. So again, more about special needs trusts. It so happens that Hinkle, Pryor, and Fisher know a lot about special needs trusts, and probably everybody that's in this session is aware of that. But it's so important that if you are developing a special needs trust, you must be sure that you hire an attorney who specializes in special needs trusts. Every once in a while, I hear about somebody who thought they were getting a bargain. Somebody had a neighbor whose cousin thought, how hard can it be to do a special needs trust? There are some, unfortunately, little picky rules and regulations about special needs trusts in the eyes of Social Security and Medicaid. So it has to be done in a very particular way. So just please be sure if you're doing that, that you are with an attorney who has had lots of experience with special needs trusts. Okay, applying for SSI if there is a life insurance policy. There are 2 types of life insurance, whole life and term life insurance. So if the owner of a whole life insurance policy has IDD, he or she could cash it in at any time and get money, and that would result in the loss of their eligibility for SSI or Medicaid. So a person with IDD cannot be the owner or the beneficiary of a whole life insurance policy. It's okay for them to be the insured party. With term life insurance, there is no cash surrender aspect. So a person with IDD can be the insured party on a term life policy, but could not be the beneficiary. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit now about ABLE accounts. ABLE is achieving a better life experience. It was passed at the federal level back in 2014. It says that a person with a disability can deposit up to $15,000 a year in an ABLE tax-exempt savings account. And that doesn't have to be the person with a disability. It could be family members on behalf of the person with a disability. But the maximum is $15,000 per year in an ABLE account. To be eligible, the person must be receiving SSI or SSDI with the age of onset of disability before age 26. Or with medical documentation, you could deposit money into an ABLE account as a spend down before applying for SSI. So I said a couple of minutes ago, if you got more, let's just say somebody has $6,000 or $7,000 or whatever in assets at this point in time, a person who's almost going to be 18 years old. And that could be from baby bonds, it could be from stocks, some savings, birthday gifts, whatever it happens to be. Again, the person with a disability cannot have more than $2,000 in assets in their name with their Social Security number. But if the amount that they have is under $15,000, the money could be deposited into an ABLE account before applying for SSI as a spend down. Now, obviously, if there's a very large amount of money, then the ABLE account isn't going to help. But it certainly has helped some families where there was under $15,000 that the person with a disability had in their name, and it could be put into an ABLE account. Again, ABLE accounts will not affect continuing financial eligibility for SSI, Medicaid, or other public benefits. Some more about ABLE accounts. They are available in New Jersey, and here is the website to open an ABLE account if you wanted to do that with NJ Able. There's also something called the ABLE National Resource Center. Website is www.ablenrc.org. It is a great website if you really want to get in depth and learn lots of details about ABLE accounts. There is, however, something that you need to know. There is always the good news and the bad news about whatever it is that you're considering. Upon the death of the beneficiary, the state in which he or she lived may file a claim for all or a portion of the funds in the ABLE account to recoup costs paid by the state while the beneficiary was receiving services through the state Medicaid program. So please keep that in mind. Now, sometimes parents have opened, or grandparents have opened a 529 account when the individual was much younger and there was a hope and an expectation that they were going to go on to college or some other education after high school. So, eligible educational institutions, any college, university, vocational school, or post-secondary educational institution. If you have opened or someone has opened a 529 account on behalf of your son or daughter with IDD, you would want to be sure that the account owner is a parent or grandparent and not the person with IDD. The student should be the designated beneficiary. When applying for SSI, as long as the account owner is not the individual with IDD, then a 529 account is not counted as an asset when the SSI applicant is 18 or older. Okay, what happens if there is a 529 account, but the individual with IDD is not going to college? The owner would be able to transfer the funds to a different 529 account for a member of the beneficiary's family. There is also a rollover provision. So the family could roll over up to $15,000 a year into the ABLE account that I mentioned a minute ago. If a 529 account had more than $15,000, they could do a rollover in multiple years. And I would advise to talk to an accountant about the implications of a rollover. There's also something called a 36-month look back on a child's assets when applying for SSI. So as I've said, the child cannot have more than $2,000 in assets, with money in an ABLE account being an exception. Assets including savings bonds, any kind of asset whatsoever, stocks, savings account, anything that has the Social Security number of your son or daughter. On financial transfers, Social Security can do a 36-month look-back period on the child's assets. This is 36 months before the date that the individual filed an application for SSI. If the person is already receiving SSI, the 36-month look-back period starts when the resources were occurring. Okay, so how to apply for supplemental security income. There's a website Social Security has. The link is on the screen for information specifically to apply for SSI. You could start the disability application process online as long as this is a first-time SSI application. As you all may know, during the coronavirus pandemic, Social Security offices are closed to the public, but the employees are working. So parents can certainly call the local Social Security office to make an appointment to apply for SSI benefits for their son or daughter. Now this slide shows exactly how to talk to your local Social Security office. People may know that there is a national toll-free number. We've known that for a long time. What I'm hearing from a lot of families who were trying to call the national toll-free number is that there was a very long waiting period. Families told me that they had to wait 45 minutes or longer to get to talk to someone at the national toll-free number. And then they weren't even sure that they were getting accurate information when they finally reached somebody. So I would recommend that you contact your local Social Security office. And you can see on this slide, there's a way to enter your zip code, and there's like a locator lookup based on your zip code. And that way you can actually get an appointment with somebody at your local Social Security office. Maria mentioned in the intro that I have a group list and a lot of emails that I send on pertinent issues. And I have one that was sent specifically on this. If anybody would like to see this specific email, I would be glad to send it to you. And that would allow you to just, within that email, put in your zip code and the local phone number for your Social Security office would pop up. Okay, applying for SSI or Medicaid if parents are divorced. When parents are divorced, child support is viewed as the child's income. Depending upon the amount of child support, the adolescent may not be eligible for SSI or Medicaid, but keep in mind there is a 1/3 exclusion of child support income. So if the child is receiving $1,000 a month in child support, only $666 would be counted as income. So when SSI does begin for an adult, meaning anyone who's 18 or older, parents should open a new bank account jointly with their son or daughter with IDD, with the child's Social Security number first. The SSI checks would be deposited electronically into the new bank account. And please keep in mind, just like you had to keep in mind in doing the application, going forward, the individual with IDD cannot have more than $2,000 in their bank account. Sometimes there's a lump sum back payment, and if that happens, you would have 9 months to do a spend down. You could always open an ABLE account if needed, if the money is going to exceed $2,000 in the bank account. And you'd also, upon being enrolled in SSI and Medicaid, you'd want to select a Medicaid HMO or be auto-assigned. SSI and traveling outside of the United States. Now, I know that during the pandemic, a lot of people, most people, are not traveling, but this pandemic hopefully won't last forever. So this is information for whenever the pandemic ends and people decide to travel again. If a person receives SSI and travels out of the United States for 30 consecutive days or more, they're not eligible for SSI or Medicaid during any month when they are outside the United States. And any individual who was receiving SSI and traveled out of the US for 30 days or longer is not considered by Social Security to be back in the United States until they're here for 30 consecutive days upon returning. After approval for SSI or Medicaid, you can expect that there will be requests to respond for redeterminations, and SSI and Medicaid can be terminated for failure to respond. I don't know exactly how often you're going to be getting a request for a redetermination. I hear different things from families, but whenever you get any kind of request from SSI or Medicaid, please respond in a timely way to those requests. And if you are moving, be sure Social Security and Medicaid have the new mailing address. If the person with SSI is employed, you must report the wages monthly to Social Security. There's something called substantial gainful activity. That amount can change each year. For 2020, it's $1,260 a month. Gross income is the allowable maximum for a person who's employed, who's getting SSI. Okay, what happens if the SSI application is denied? So the first part of my presentation was talking about knowing how to apply and applying with the hope that it's going to be approved. But not everyone is getting approved. And I hear more and more about people with a son or daughter with IDD, and they were denied SSI. So if that should happen, the family is advised to appeal in a timely manner. This is the link for the easiest way to appeal online. There are three possible reasons for an SSI denial. One would be the assets were above $2,000. And sometimes the parents thought that they had the assets below $2,000, but maybe they forgot about baby bonds or something that they just stocks or something from years ago, and they really didn't recall that that had happened, but Social Security found it. Because if the son or daughter with IDD's Social Security number was on the document, you can assume that Social Security will locate it. So that's a reason for denial. The second reason is there's a special needs trust, but it was not done correctly. The third reason, and this is what I hear about most often, is the medical documentation was not sufficient to justify a severe disability per SSA requirements. So the issue about severe disability, again, from what I'm hearing anecdotally, if somebody has what we would consider a more severe or profound developmental disability, I'm typically hearing that those people are approved. But if somebody has a disability which is clearly a developmental disability, but doesn't, in the view of Social Security, isn't viewed as severe enough, then I'm hearing about people who have been denied. So in doing the application, parents should include all of their child's diagnoses, if applicable. For example, if there's autism, if there's a seizure disorder, depression, OCD, whatever it happens to be, as many diagnoses as there are, obviously legitimately, it's important to document those diagnoses in doing the SSI application. Again, from what I'm hearing, people with high functioning autism, or might be viewed as Asperger's, will probably be turned down for SSI. I'm not saying that you shouldn't apply, but do it in a way that you prepare yourself for the application to be turned down and then appeal it. So if the person applies, they're denied. They appeal if that's denied. And again, the likelihood is if the first application was denied, And if the appeal, without any additional information from what was sent in the first time, there's a good chance that that appeal is going to be denied. So at that point, parents may want to contact an attorney to represent their son or daughter at a fair hearing with a judge. And there are some attorneys who specialize in this type of case. And from what I hear, the usual way in which this is done is if the attorney accepts the case, there would be no fee from the family unless the attorney wins the case. And then the fee is a percentage of the lump sum back payment from Social Security. But since the attorney does not get paid unless winning at the fair hearing, the attorneys want to accept the cases that they think they have the best chance of winning. And since they do so many of these cases, they have a pretty good feel for the kinds of cases that they're likely to win. A referral can come from the New Jersey State Bar Association. There's a lawyer referral service, and here's a link if that's the kind of direction that the family decides to go in. So why is it important to have SSI? Now, I've talked a lot about apply for SSI, apply for SSI. So why is that really so important? So one reason is, in New Jersey, when a person has SSI, they have Medicaid automatically. There is no separate Medicaid application. Medicaid and SSI come together in a bundle. But if the SSI ends, that Medicaid will also end. So now I'm going to talk about the connection between SSI for a person with IDD and their parents' work record. So when the parent of a person with IDD retires, or if the parent becomes disabled or passes away, the son or daughter with IDD is going to receive Social Security Disability Insurance, SSDI, and that benefit comes from the parent's work record. The monthly SSDI benefit on the parent's work record would often be too high to be eligible for New Jersey Medicaid in general, as a general thing that would often be too high. However, and this is the importance of having SSI first, when persons with disabilities previously had SSI, they are viewed as disabled adult children, Section 1634 DAC, as defined by the Social Security Administration, and therefore they are eligible to get Medicaid again after they start to receive SSI on the parent's work record, and they can get that from the County Board of Social Services because the amount of the SSDI benefit is disregarded. So this is, I'm going to repeat some of what I just said before, but this is the official definition of a Section 1634 DAC from Social Security. It is the person who was receiving supplemental security income benefits and Medicaid and meets the following criteria. They're at least 18 years of age, having blindness or a disability which began before the age of 22, has been receiving SSI based on blindness or disability, and has lost SSI due to the receipt of Social Security benefits on a parent's record due to the retirement, death, or disability of a parent. And also the person can't have more than $2,000 in resources, not including money in a special needs trust or ABLE account funds. Now that last point that I mentioned is not from the Social Security Administration, but it's an obvious addition to the rules on becoming a Section 1634 DAC. But one other point that I want to mention about this, sometimes because the person with IDD who has SSI is employed and has a sufficient number of work credits on their own work, not because of the parent, but for their own work, that type of person could end up getting SSDI on their work record. So they could flip from SSI to SSDI, but they're not a Section 1634 DAC because the SSI did not stop because of the parent's record. It stopped because of their own work record. Okay, so this is just, and again, to reiterate a little bit more about what happens with Section 1634 DAC, that the person with IDD transitions from SSI to SSDI. And letters will come from Social Security and Medicaid. This is the part that is frightening to parents, so I just want to emphasize what to expect. The notification from Medicaid is Medicaid will stop 4 months after the letters were mailed. But the Medicaid that stops is the SSI Medicaid bundle. And because this person is a Section 1634 DAC, they can get Medicaid again. Now again, they never applied for Medicaid before. This is going to be the first time they're applying an actual application for Medicaid. So they should receive a blue envelope from DDD with a request for information. Now the blue envelope process was the standard process before the coronavirus pandemic, but during the pandemic, I've been told that the information will be emailed rather than mailed in a blue envelope. The RFI, request for information, is very, very similar to the ABD Medicaid application. I'm not sure why they're calling it RFI, but that is the term that they're using. It should be completed and returned promptly. And this is for essentially the application for the person to get Medicaid from the county. So again, when applying for Medicaid, the son or daughter with IDD cannot have more than $2,000 in assets. I know I've said this over and over again, but it's important for parents to recognize that this is all the way through. This is going to be a requirement. Funds in an ABLE account are an exception. Funds in a special needs trust are an exception to that $2,000. Okay, now this is some new information, which if I was doing this presentation even a year ago, this part would be different, but here we are. So previously, when a person with IDD had SSI, and then a parent retired, became disabled, or passed away, the switch to SSDI was done automatically. Recently, apparently, the parent is being told to do a new application to Social Security before the SSDI will be effective. Now, I am hearing some different things from parents. One type of thing that I'm hearing is you, the parent, must do an entirely new application as though you were applying from the very beginning for your son or daughter to have a Social Security benefit. Another thing that I'm hearing is, and I don't know if this is the office, the Social Security office, the worker at the office, but another thing that I'm hearing is the worker telling the parent, well, we have the information that you had submitted for the SSI application, so we're going to use that information and fold it into a new application and check with doctors just to confirm, but you, the parent, don't have to do an entirely new application for your son or daughter. So just so you know, I'm hearing both things, and this is where feedback from families is really helpful for me to have a sense of what's going on. For your purposes, it is really important to save all the medical and IEP documents from when SSI is approved. So at the time of a parent's retirement or disability or death, if you need to provide everything again to Social Security, you'll have it in a folder and it'll be a nuisance, but you can just pull it out and use the same information. It was the same information that got your son or daughter approved for SSI to begin with, so it'll be fine. It's just very sad if parents have decided, well, the person has SSI, they don't really need to keep all those papers from all those years ago, and then they don't keep them. So my suggestion would be keep everything safely in a file. Okay, now I'm going to talk about what happens if an 18-year-old with IDD is not eligible for SSI because they have too much income already from SSDI. So occasionally, a mom or dad has retired or become disabled or passed away before their son or daughter with IDD could apply for SSI at age 18. Therefore, the person with IDD already is receiving SSDI from the parent's work record. And in most cases, they're not going to be eligible for SSI because they're getting a higher SSDI income. So this is the term non-DAC. This is DDD terminology, but if DDD is good with that terminology, that's what the rest of us are using. So a non-DAC is somebody who never had SSI as an adult, meaning at age 18 or older. They're now receiving Social Security disability insurance on the parent's work record. And if the amount of that SSDI benefit is above $1,064 a month, and that's for this year, the amount goes up a little bit each year. The person is not going to be eligible for county Medicaid because of the amount of the SSDI that they're receiving. And other situations which might qualify as this non-DAC status would be receiving child support, depending on the amount of the child support that they're receiving. So families are often confused because DDD notices say that Medicaid is required. If you remember, the very first or second slide that I did today said it's required, you have to have Medicaid as well as being functionally eligible for DDD services. But then there was an asterisk that said there is an exception. So this, being a non-DAC, is an exception to DDD's Medicaid requirement. I developed a fact sheet on non-DAC status. So if anybody would like that, please email me. I would be happy to forward the non-DAC status fact sheet to you. But also please know that being approved by DDD as a non-DAC does not provide Medicaid immediately. Sometimes parents think, oh, DDD said it's non-DAC, that means there's Medicaid. And that's not quite that simple. In the future, the person who has non-DAC status from DDD will be eligible for Medicaid from DDD. But it doesn't happen immediately. There's still an application that's going to need to be filled in. And again, you can always contact me for more information. I think here we go. I advanced my slides too quickly. This is a screenshot of the Medicaid eligibility problem form that I developed. If needed, I would be happy to forward it to anybody electronically. DDD also has something that they call their troubleshooting form. It's very similar to my form. You would never need to do both forms. I happen to think my form is a little bit better, but either form is adequate if somebody is requesting non-DAC status. Okay, there's also something that I'm going to talk about briefly called Medicaid through NJ Workability. It's a different Medicaid category that I want to mention briefly. So, New Jersey Workability provides Medicaid for people with disabilities who are employed between ages 16 and 64. The person must have a permanent disability, working part-time or full-time. And sometimes people who are eligible are working very, very part-time. You can earn as much as $64,596 a year and can have up to $20,000 in personal assets and still qualify. So you can see the allowance to have up to $20,000 in assets is significant and much, much higher than the other Medicaid categories. In addition, IRA and 401k personal retirement accounts are okay and are not counted for eligibility purposes. Okay, a little bit more about NJ Workability, because there's always like the good news and the bad news. Okay, this is the bad news about NJ Workability. How can a person be terminated from NJ Workability? Well, one would be not being employed, since it's a requirement to be employed to have NJ Workability. The second would be having unearned income above the threshold of $1,064 a month in 2020. And by the way, if a person receives SSDI from their parents' work record, NJ Workability views that as unearned income. The third way to be terminated from NJ Workability is reaching age 65. And sadly, I have had situations where I get a phone call because, and usually would be a sibling that would be calling me, that, let's say, the brother has been getting NJ Workability, turned 65, is still working, and got a termination notice because NJ Workability ends when the person turns 65. So if a person has DDD services, they can apply for a different type of Medicaid through the DDD waiver unit, but the total income can't exceed $2,349 a month in 2020. Finally, no one should be terminated from any type of Medicaid during the coronavirus pandemic. Okay, so I mentioned the $2,349 a month a minute ago. That is a concern for people who have a very significant amount of money coming in, usually because of a parent who has passed away, and either their SSDI, a pension, possibly combined with their own work. So what happens if the total income does exceed $2,349 a month? Unfortunately, that is the threshold for this year, and that's gross income. So if a person with IDD has more than that maximum income per month, they cannot currently have Medicaid or DDD services unless they pay privately. DDD is working on a process for a qualified income trust that would allow these folks to be able to have services, but that process is not yet available. And because of all of the work that everyone has been doing on the coronavirus pandemic, I don't think it's really being looked at this point. But if anyone has a son or daughter with monthly income above the maximum, please email me. I would want DDD to know about your situation. Okay, Medicare and people with IDD. If a person with IDD has been receiving SSDI for 24 months from a parent's work record, Medicare is going to start automatically. Medicare will also start because the person with IDD has SSDI on their own work record for 24 months. The person who has both Medicare and Medicaid is known as a dual eligible. And you cannot have Medicare without having the SSDI benefit for 24 months or turning 65. So to be a dual eligible, having both Medicare and Medicaid and Medicare benefits, Medicare is going to be the first payer. There's another type of Medicaid that I'll talk about in a minute briefly. But if the person has regular Medicaid, NJ Family Care Medicaid expansion, they are not able to have Medicare also. I do have a fact sheet on dual eligibles with IDD, which I will be very glad to forward to anybody who wants to see it. Okay, now, the type of Medicaid that is not connected to having a disability. The Medicaid that I've been talking about throughout this presentation thus far is called ABD, or Aged, Blind, and Disabled Medicaid. There are two overarching Medicaid categories in New Jersey, and then there are subcategories. But of the two overarching categories, the ABD is, again, aged, blind, and disabled. And most people with IDD, the vast majority, have that type of Medicaid. But this other type, NJ Family Care Medicaid or Medicaid expansion, is not connected to having a disability. It's purely based on low income. So the income maximum for this year is $1,468 a month or $17,000 a year. And again, the eligibility is low income. There is nothing to do with disability to have this type of Medicaid. But there's always a downside. Whenever I'm saying like the good news is this, but the bad news, and this is the bad news. You cannot have Medicare and have this type of Medicaid. So as an example, a person could be receiving SSDI and be under the $1,468 a month and not be a Section 1634 DAC and need Medicaid. So they could qualify for this type of Medicaid expansion, but 24 months after the SSDI starts, their Medicare is going to start automatically. So when that Medicare begins, they would then lose eligibility for Medicaid expansion. They probably would be able to be a non-DAC through the DDD waiver unit. But I just want people to understand that there is, and I want to emphasize also, I don't make any of these rules. I don't like a lot of these rules, but this is the way it is. So I'm just communicating what the rules are. And the other thing to recognize about having this Medicaid expansion Medicaid is the person with IDD cannot be a dependent on the parent's tax return. So this is the kind of Medicaid, let's just say somebody has applied for SSI for their son or daughter who has high functioning autism. And they are turned down because Social Security says, no, it's not a severe enough disability. And the parents decide to pursue finding an attorney and doing a fair hearing, and hopefully that will be approved. But there's a process and a time period before that would occur. So then sometimes I would have a conversation with a parent about what they could do so that their son or daughter, who, if they've been approved for DDD as with functional eligibility, but they have to have Medicaid, they could apply. The son or daughter could get this type of Medicaid expansion as long as the son or daughter is not a dependent on the parent's tax return. So that's obviously an issue for the parents to discuss. And sometimes I hear about this in the context of parents who are divorced, which adds another layer of mom would like to do this, but the son is a dependent on the father's tax return. And so there are all kinds of issues that have to be discussed, but it is certainly possible. And I definitely know of some folks who are receiving DDD services. They have been turned down for SSI. They are receiving Medicaid expansion, but they're not a dependent on the parent's tax return. And one more point that I just want to mention parenthetically, Medicaid expansion exists in New Jersey. It is part of the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. As long as that law remains intact, Medicaid expansion will remain intact. If this law happens to be struck down in the Supreme Court, my understanding is that Medicaid expansion would go away. Okay, this is the very last slide of a very long presentation with lots and lots of information. I always include this information anytime I do any kind of presentation because it's so important for families to know about. When a parent has health insurance from their employer, as you all may know, all young adults can stay on the parent's health insurance until age 26. If you have a son or daughter with IDD, they can stay on the parent's health insurance after age 26. But before the 26th birthday, the parent must request a form from the employer's Human Resources Department. There's a special process for young adults, and they can stay on their parents' health insurance as long as the doctor certifies that the person has a disability and they're not capable of self-sustaining employment. So self-sustaining means self-supporting. This does not have anything to do with having a part-time job. This is, are they capable for self-sustaining employment or not? If the doctor feels that they're not capable of self-sustaining employment, it signs the form, parent returns it to HR, and the son or daughter can stay on the parent's private health insurance for as long as the parent has that health insurance. I hear sometimes employers want something like a certification every year. Other employers say once is enough. It is one of the easiest things that families can do to make sure that their son or daughter can stay on the parent's usually really good private health insurance. It is fine to have private health insurance and also have Medicaid. Medicaid is always the payer of last resort. And we have a fact sheet on private insurance. If anybody wants me to send that, I would be happy to do that. Okay, that covers it.
Great. So we have lots of questions. And Bev, I was just going to mention, if you just want to share with my office the multiple fact sheets that you mentioned,
okay,
we email them out to everybody who registered for this presentation. So this way people don't have to individually ask you for them. If
sure. I'd be happy to do that. Sure.
All righty. So I'm going to go to the chat, and I do know somebody has a hand up, but I did have questions that came in before the hand went up. So start with some of the questions here, and then I'm going to bounce over to the person whose hand is up. So just bear with me a second as I'm trying to get the questions, because there's an awful lot of them here. All righty. So
should I send the fact sheets to Christina or to you, or what should I do?
To Christina would be best.
Okay.
Yep. And then she will be able to get those out to everybody. So first question that I have here is, if your child has a developmental disability, how do you know which to apply for, SSDI or SSI?
Okay, so you would be applying for SSI at age 18 unless the child is already receiving a Social Security benefit from a parent's retirement, disability, or death. And so in most cases, in the vast majority of cases, the parent is going to be applying for SSI for their 18-year-old son or daughter.
Okay. If a minor child receives SSDI due to a parent's retirement or death, what do they do at age 18 regarding SSI?
So part of it is going to depend on the amount of the SSDI. I'm going to assume for purposes of this conversation that it's at an amount that's high enough that the person is just not going to be eligible for SSI. So I'm going to make that assumption. Every once in a while, let's just say sadly, if a parent became disabled at a much younger age and so the parent didn't have much of a work history, there are exceptions like that. But in most cases, because of the SSDI that's received, the person is not going to be eligible for SSI. Okay. One more thing actually about SSDI, if it's based on, let's just say, a survivor's benefit, the benefits would, let's just give an example. If a parent dies and has 2 children, and one child has a disability and one child doesn't, the child who doesn't have a disability getting that SSDI survivor benefit is going to end at 18 for the child without the disability. For the child with a disability, it should be continuing, and the parent would have to talk to Social Security and provide documentation if needed for that benefit to continue ongoing. And that certainly has happened for a lot of people, to continue it. But you have to know to continue it, because Social Security would make an assumption that they're just going to cut you off just as they would for a child who didn't have a disability at 18.
Okay. And if an SSI recipient under the age of 21 goes to an out-of-state residential placement, what happens to their New Jersey Medicaid?
That's a tough one, because if they're out of state and they need health care, they're going to need it in the other state. So if there are details that that parent wants to contact me about, that might be to send me a specific email with more details on, with the details surrounding that situation.
Okay. I'm going to try to unmute Pamela, who wants to ask a question but didn't put it in the chat feature. But anybody else who has a question, instead of raising your hand, because it creates additional technological things we have to do, you try to put them into the chat feature. But I know Pamela's up there patiently waiting. So let me try to figure out what to do with this. All right. And this may or may actually not work. So.
Well, the technology is the hardest part of this presentation.
I don't know. Can you? Oh, you're unmuted. There you go.
Yes. My question is, my daughter, she is going to turn 18 April 6th, and she's currently getting SSI 264 months. Now, I have to wait until she's 18, which is going to be in April. What should I apply for, SSI or SSD, something like that?
Okay, so I'm going to put you back on mute so that Bev can answer the question. And then, of course, you're always free to just email Bev more specifics on your situation, because she might have more questions before she can answer that.
Right, and yeah, and I'm not able to go in depth, but in general, if someone is getting SSI as a child under the age of 18, and again, we tend to think someone's going to be a child way beyond 18, but Social Security views 18 as the cutoff. So if somebody has received SSI as a child, they would need to be, the parent would need to apply for them to have SSI as an adult. So it would be going through the application for an adult, because the rules and the way in which the determination is made change a little bit for adulthood. Hopefully, with all of the proper documentation, somebody who had SSI as a child would also be approved to have SSI as an adult, but it is going to be a new application.
The next question here is, my daughter is registered with Perform Care. How do I transition to DDD?
Okay, so there's a little bit of good news in that there's now a short application form which was not available until relatively recently. So if this child has Perform Care, they can do an easier, shorter application. They still have to do an application. It's not going to be automatic, but they can do the shorter application in order for them to get the DDD services. If there's a child that does not have Perform Care and wants DDD services for age 21, then what they're going to have to do is the longer, more detailed application for DDD. So if there's anyone out there who has a child who perhaps could benefit from Perform Care services from the Children's System of Care, you might want to look into it and see if there's anything. I know that's limited. I don't know if anybody think that there's extensive services from Perform Care, but if there is anything that could be helpful, then maybe they could get some help now at the younger age, and then also have the shorter form to fill in for transitioning over to apply for DDD.
Okay. I have two questions that I'm going to kind of just smush together because they're kind of a little bit similar. So one person is asking, how do we find out if there's money out there under our child's Social Security number? And the next question was asking, we applied, child's already eligible. We had forgotten about savings bonds and we just came across them. Now what do we do? So those kind of are a little bit limited. A little bit linked. So.
Right. Okay. Well, and Maria, you may know more about the answer to the first question. On the second question, what I think could be done in finding some bonds now, and Maria, we can discuss this, but my thinking is put them into an ABLE account. Hopefully it's not more than $15,000 worth of bonds. Put them into an ABLE account. Now, do you have families sometimes that you tell them to do a search to see if there is anything?
Yeah, so there's no way that I know of that an individual person can do a search on even on your own Social Security number to find out everything that's out there. Social Security Administration and Medicaid, they do have ways of doing that.
Oh, they do.
I do not know of a simple way to do that. So I don't think there's a great answer to that part of it. What I will tell you is from a legal perspective, if you truly had no knowledge of them, you will not be in trouble if you come across them later because you honestly didn't know. Now with the second family, Bev, you're 100% correct. Depending on how much those bonds total up to, yes, cash them in, put them in ABLE account. But please remember, you're now aware of these funds. You have an affirmative obligation to let Social Security know that you found them. They will be income in the month cashed. And if not, put in an ABLE account or spent down, or if they're a significant amount of money. I one time had a family that had like $80,000 in savings bonds. Those would be put into a special needs trust. Until that happens, you have a resource problem, but you are under an obligation to let the Social Security Administration know what you have found. But yeah, that would be my only addition to that.
Right. So again, based on what you were just saying, to the extent that the parents possibly can think through before they start to do an application, baby bonds in particular could be something like that, you forgot about. It was all of those years ago, but to really try to think it through.
Yeah. The next question says, is there a way a special needs trust can be reviewed to make sure it is still feasible and in accordance with all current regulations?
Okay. Well, you certainly, as I mentioned, absolutely want to be sure that the attorney has had extensive experience with special needs trusts. For sure. Absolutely. It so happens that Maria Fisher is an expert on special needs trusts, as is Paul Pryor and the staff that work there. You just want to be really, really sure and get us, I guess, what do you think? A second opinion if somebody really isn't sure?
If you have a trust and you're not 100% sure, you definitely want to have somebody review it before you submit it to Medicaid. And you really preferably would be doing this like 6 to 8 months before you're applying, because that gives us time to fix a problem. And then you go into your application process without any issues that are outstanding that could kind of hold you up. And yes, attorneys, we very often are called and somebody says, I don't need a trust, I have one. We just want you to take a look at it, make sure we're not going to have any problems. And if we are going to have a problem, how do we fix it? So you can absolutely have your trust reviewed in that fashion. The next question here is, should an ADHD diagnosis be included in the application?
So Maria, what do you think? I've been told every diagnosis that's legitimate that you have documentation for. Certainly if it's only ADHD, then you're not going to get very far. Right. But if it's that in combination with other things, with documentation, to say that, there's been an assessment and this is the documentation. What do you think, Maria?
I 100% agree. An ADHD diagnosis in and of itself is not going to likely be found to be sufficient. So, but adding it in with other diagnoses, yes, you put in every diagnosis that you do have. So I totally agree with your response. So the next question, okay. If the disabled adult has Medicaid starting at age 18 through SSI and Medicare starting at a later age through SSDI on that individual's own record, is that person allowed to get Medigap insurance?
Oh. This is a good question about Medigap. And for anybody who doesn't know, so there's Medicare for anybody who's 65 or anybody who's had SSDI for the 24 months. That you have Medicare. Medicare pays 80% of a doctor's bill. There's a 20% that's not covered for anybody who has Medicare. So the question is, what do you do with the 20%? And this, I'm going to tell you what the rule is here. And Marie, you may be well aware of this, and I totally disagree with this. This is one of those things that I absolutely vehemently disagree with. The rule is, if you have Medicare first, and then you get Medicaid, you can have a Medigap policy. So a person has Medicare, they can get Medigap, later Medicaid starts, that's fine. But if you have Medicaid first, which is like almost all of our folks, Medicaid first, and then you get Medicare. You cannot purchase a Medigap policy. And I think that is horrible. And the ARC was trying to think about advocacy that we might be able to do to change that. It's apparently not quite so simple. I just think it's wrong, but that is the way it is.
Completely agree. I think we have time maybe for one more question because we are getting close. So the next question is, my daughter currently receives $1,800 on SSD. And then it says SSI, my husband's disability retirement, and later on death benefit and her SSI. This might be one that needs to be emailed to you now that I'm looking at it because it's very, very specific. But I think the bottom line of it is that because of all of this, she's getting very close to her $2,000 limit. And what can she do about not going over that limit? And she also has Medicare and Medicaid. That you already answered. She was also asking about supplemental. So if you want to just briefly talk about what she can do about not going over the limit.
Okay, so Maria, how do you advise? I'd like to know how you advise your clients in that situation.
I think what the situation here is that she's concerned about going over her $2,000 resource limit. So it kind of depends on how much somebody's talking about that they're going over it within a year. If within a year, what they have to, and it seems like she's getting money from different places. So SSI really is meant to be spent and used for the individual. So that would not be able to be going like into an ABLE account or a first party trust. SSD on a parent's record, or I think that also this person's getting a retirement benefit on the father. Those could be put into an ABLE or to a first party special needs trust. If an ABLE account limitation is enough if moving up to $15,000 within a year solves your problem, then I would go with the ABLE account. If it's not going to solve your problem because you have to actually move more over, then you got to look at a first party trust. That would be my answer. It's a little hard because the information's not as clear. Like I'm not sure where all the money's coming from. So I do think this is one that would be better served with an email.
But what I'm wondering is for somebody, if somebody, you can only have, say, $2,000 in your bank, your ordinary bank account. So if you've got, let's just say, $2,100 coming in every single month in these deposits from wherever it's coming from, would that be considered a problem, even if you're doing something with it after it comes in?
Yeah, that's not a problem at all, because you can have $2,100 come in, it's income in that month, and as long as it gets spent during that month and it's at the last day of the month, your balance in all of your accounts combined, remember it's not just the one account, if you have multiple accounts, you have to add those up. If it's below 2,000, you're fine because it's income for that 1 month where it comes in, it turns into a resource at the end of the month. But if what's happening is every month you're saving a portion of this, and now as you get closer to the end of the year, now you're getting close to going over that 2,000. If it's a little bit, just spend it on something. That's the easiest thing. But if it's a continual problem and it's not something that you can just spend on something, then you need to look to the ABLE or the first party trust. But it's not a problem coming in that month if it's under whatever the income limitation is for the program that you're on. And she doesn't seem to have an income problem. It's a resource problem, I think she's talking about. So is that what you would think too, Bev?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
What time is it? Because we're getting super, okay, we have like 3 minutes. So let's, this is a good question. Does a person who has earned enough work credits have to apply for SSDI, or are they automatically put on SSDI?
So my understanding is that they're put on SSDI because they have the credits. What have you seen?
I think that's the answer of what's supposed to happen, but we do often find that it doesn't get picked up necessarily by the Social Security Administration. And then we find somebody who, when it does get picked up, they realize they should have been doing this for a number of years, and then there's back payments that are involved. The same thing even happens sometimes when a parent goes on to their benefits. I've had many cases where either it didn't get picked up or Social Security didn't notice it. I'm not exactly sure how, because it's like part of that process. but they'll figure it out like 4 or 5 years later, and then the child gets this huge back payment. So I always say you can't really rely on a government agency to automatically do something. It may be the way it's supposed to work, but it doesn't always work that way. At least not in my experience, because people have issues with it and have problems with it. I think oh, go ahead.
Yeah, the rule is supposed to be that if you're eligible for anything else, whether it's unemployment or SSDI, if you've got SSI, that's supposed to be the last resort if there's nothing else that you qualify for. But obviously, from what your experience has been, the government doesn't necessarily pick up on what is.
Yeah, it seems like it just doesn't get noticed sometimes. There's a ton of questions, but unfortunately we do have to stop because we do have our next session starting in just a couple of minutes. So Bev, I just want to thank you so much for being with us.
Pleasure.
And everybody, please remember your questions that did not get answered. Bev is very generous with her time. She talks to families all the time. She's very happy to answer your emails. Her email address was on that first slide. We're going to send everybody the slide deck. So in case you did not write it down, you'll have it again. You can email her your question directly. Just bear with her, give her some time, because I have a feeling she's going to be inundated with emails from this group, which is great. We love all the questions. So just bear with her. So give her some time to get back to you. But she has promised she will get back to everyone.
And let me just I can give my email address now, just in case somebody wants to write it down who didn't get it initially. B Roberts, BROBERTS @arcnj.org.
Excellent. Thank you. Everyone, thank you for being here. Bev, thank you for being here. Everybody stay
My pleasure.
Bev, would you like to say the last closing words before we close out the session?
Just thank you for having me. This has been terrific. Really nice.
Well, thank you very much. And everybody stay safe. Hope to see you in our last session, which will be starting in a few minutes. And thank you for joining us for the conference. Bye.
Thank you for watching this encore presentation from the Fall 2020 Hinkle, Pryor & Fisher Parent Empowerment Conference. With 24 other presentations to view, there is plenty of additional information to help you become empowered. As a reminder, the information contained in this video is not a substitute for individual legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. Copyright 2020 Hinkle, Pryor & Fisher, PC, Attorneys at Law. All rights reserved.